Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Town Hall. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items, which we'll address on the next slide. I'm Erin Johnson, Assistant Vice President for Strategic Financial Initiatives and Chief of Staff. So as we get underway, we want to make sure you know we are recording. All attendees have been placed on mute. We will address questions throughout the meeting using the Q&A function in the Zoom. Please do ask your questions along the way. And if you have any other issues, you can contact us by chatting to the host. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Gower, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. He's also our University Treasurer.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, everybody. It is great to see almost 400 people joining us for the town hall this morning. Very happy that you can join us. Hope that you have had a productive summer, but also opportunity to refresh. I just came back from vacation on Monday. Myself had a really good opportunity to refresh. Came back to a lot of things to address because it is a busy time, but that we all need to take advantage of those. So in just a moment, I want to get to the agenda. First, on the next slide, please. I'd like to briefly highlight the guiding principles and values for the University Finance Administration Division. These are things that we hold important within the division and working with our partners throughout the university: support and collaboration, building understanding and trust, recognizing and constantly trying to improve how we work, aligning to the strategic needs of the university, and both establishing and working and developing accountability for what we do and how we do it and how we work with our partners. So these are things that I always like to come back to when we meet these town halls, but also when we work within our division, whether it be at all staff meetings or other venue. Next, please. Now for our agenda, I'm going to start where I have been doing the last several of these town halls and talking a little bit about ongoing trends in higher education. That will lead to discussion of what we've referred to and what has been accepted by the Board of Governors as our financial sustainability project. After that presentation and discussion of that work, Maggie Quinn, our Chief Procurement Officer, and Lauren Ruiz from our travel team in University Procurement Services will present on the new Concur Travel and Expense system that launched on July 1. Though it launched on July 1, recognize that some people, given the academic year, are going to be coming to this for the first time in September, not in July. And so we want to talk about what it is and how do we support users out there. Then following that, as we do at each town hall, David Moore, our Vice President for Financial Planning Analytics and Chief Budget Officer, will present on the budget. This session focuses on the fiscal 25 budget that was approved by the Board of Governors in early July. And then finally, we will have time for general questions and answers. As Erin said, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit those questions. As we go through the presentations, we'll look at the questions and try to address them as they arise, but also we'll keep time at the end for ones that did not come up during the presentations and more general questions. We're going to do our best to answer as many as possible during this Zoom session. Anything we do not get to because of time, we will get those answers in writing and post them to our website along with both the materials from this meeting and the recording of this meeting. So those will be available to you. As a reminder, after this session will be the Ask the Expert session, which will have separate Zoom links throughout the day. There's information in emails that came out, but we'll also put separate information in the chat as we get to that point. Next, please. And next. So in previous town halls, I've focused on trends in higher education and general issues as it relates to particularly the business side. In a recent session, I talked about the top 5 business issues as identified through the National Association of College and University Business Officers. And I expect for the next town hall to be able to talk about an update and present an update for that. But this is something that came to me recently. EAB is a organization in which we are a member. They are out of Washington. They're a think and research tank. They work on providing support for presidents, for chief business officers, for facilities officers, for any number of different types of roles throughout a university. And so I regularly get information from them on trends, research that they've done, observations that they have. And this one I thought was particularly interesting and pertinent to us because it talks about 5 levels of financial performance within higher education and what is going on, what are short-term and long-term ways to address that. What you don't want to be at is the top, that is existential threat. Rutgers is not an existential threat, but there are many of our colleague universities and colleges, in particular some of the small liberal arts colleges, some regional publics that are in these ranges. You may have seen recently of the merger of Bloomfield College into Montclair State. You know, Bloomfield College was at that existential space, and merging with another institution was what was necessary there. So we absolutely need to stay away from that level. But as you go down here, you see other things that that may be pertinent to us, like crisis, enrollment declines. We have seen some enrollment declines. We're seeing improvements now. What's the long-term trend? We've had for a number of years structural deficit coming out of COVID years and coming after the end of the support, the significant and important support that we got during the COVID years from the federal government and from the federal government through the state government. And we've been taking actions to address those, but you know, we see some of these things that are in the crisis, but we're not at crisis, but we need to be very vigilant about where we are, and vigilance comes down below there. Vigilant and concerned so that we don't find ourselves in that place. Concerned, you see some of the things that are the trends as they identify those. What are some of the fixes that are needed for those? And again, what we want to do is to stay out of those areas. We are in what I would say probably between vigilance and concern. We have some financial pressures that I'll talk about shortly. We're taking some steps to secure the university's financial sustainability. These are major steps, major initiatives. There'll be more discussion about that as we go forward. But when we are trying to do this in a fashion that is deliberate, is planned, is careful, is not crisis oriented. But if we don't do so, we could face those issues. What we want to do is get down to number one and be comfortable where we are on a long-term and a short-term position. So this is helpful just to look at it. It doesn't, some of these things apply to us. As I say, we find ourselves in a certain position here, but that's why we're doing the hard work right now. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, I mentioned that we are in a structural deficit. We've been in a structural deficit for a number of years. We found ourselves in that coming out of COVID, coming out of the use of those funds, addressing the fact that we had some enrollment pressures. The mix of our students changed. Our cost structures went up, some in response to the COVID emergency, some in response to inflation pressures, some in response to how inflation pressures pushed compensation needs. And all of those things came together to put us in a position of operating deficits. And last year's operating deficit was budgeted at $89 million, which is a significant amount of money. And we are going through the closing process right now to understand where we actually ended up. Those of you who helped through the Q3 forecast, the results of that work came to a conclusion that we were going to land fairly close to that number. And so that we were getting close to where we planned. What we are doing is deliberately working on this deficit and trying not to do it in a crisis mindset. During COVID, we saved money. During COVID, we did what we could to improve our reserves, because we knew coming out of COVID, we would need to be drawing on those for a number of years in order to be able to make the adjustments, primarily on program and enrollment side, but also on cost side, to deal with what was a very clear projection of structural deficit. This work is going on. This work is intensive. It is starting from the top, from the president's cabinet, from the board itself, from working with the chancellors, working with deans. It'll develop as we go across. But again, trying to do it in a way that is not like what happened at West Virginia University, which they had to address things in a 3-month period rather than a multi-year period, trying to do things smart, do things deliberatively, but paying attention to time and paying attention to the fact that when you draw on reserves, eventually they're going to run out if you don't do something about it. Next. Show this slide just to identify that we're already on the road. We have been doing a lot of things in the last several years to address efficiencies, to address enrollment, to try to stabilize our baseline enrollment, to look at new programs, to try to look for new customers that will drive new revenues. So we're not starting from ground zero. We're starting from a position of having a great deal of data, having some initiatives well underway, but also trying to harness these and organize them together so that we can work on the things that are most important to the institution. We need to improve our revenue position. We need to develop further cost efficiencies. But at the same time, we need to develop operational excellence. We need to not just work cheaper, we need to work better. We need to work smarter. We need to be more, get more bang for every buck that we use. And so we're not looking at layoffs, we're looking at how work is getting done and how do we streamline that kind of thing. So it is deliberative, but it has to be to task. We have to work on it regularly. We have to work on it continuously. We have to look at how we are improving. To that end, I think next slide, one I want to get to. To that end, we developed a financial strategy for Rutgers. This is where we would put into writing what do we intend to do, or where do we intend to be in order to sustain the university in the long run, recognizing that there are always things that are going to be coming down the pike. We didn't anticipate a pandemic. We can anticipate the so-called enrollment cliff of traditional college-age students. We see that, we anticipate that, plan for that. What else can we do? What else can we do that works on our operating margin, that makes sure that we can generate capital for needs? We have a great deal of capital needs, especially in the areas of deferred maintenance, whether those be facilities or technology. We need to be constantly putting more money into fixing those issues. We also need to have a source of new capital for new facilities, for improved facilities. So there's a lot of things that for the long-term benefit and the long-term sustaining of the university, we need to do. But those were put into words and put into policy this past spring, resulting in the Board of Governors adopting a what I think is a first, or a very small number of institutions have developed financial strategies for where they intend to be in the long term, and have measures that attach to it. So this is policy 40.1.4, the financial strategy. And I recommend that to you to take a look at, because it is looking at where we intend to be over the next 5 years, where we intend to point in the next 5 years. And I think that at a future town hall, we will talk more about what are the specific initiatives that are going on within the President's Cabinet, within the Chancellor-led units, within the central administration, to try to move in this direction. I can say that by virtue of the Board of Governors making this a policy, they have instructed us this is what we have to do. They've instructed the President, they've instructed me, they've instructed the chancellors that this is the direction we have to go to sustain the university in the long run, so that in 10 years we're in a solid position. In 10 years we're generating enough funds for deferred maintenance, for technology needs, for program development, for capital development, for replenishing our reserves, so that we do have rainy day funds going forward. So a lot of work. This is I would say this is we were at the end of the beginning when the Board of Governors passed this. Now we're at the beginning of the next stage, and that is, how do we get there? What do we do? How do we focus on revenue? How do we focus on efficiency, but operational excellence? Those are the things that are important as we go forward. So lots more to come in future town halls and other venues. And if you have questions associated with this, please put them into the chat. We can look at some of them now. Aaron, if we're doing okay on time, and then go to the next stage.
Yes, Mike, we can go ahead and take a couple questions now, and any others that come in we'll address in the general Q&A. The first one is this. Can you please review with us the size of the university's reserves, what you would say is included in them? So for example, what portion are dedicated to startups or school-funded research, capital plans, etc.? and whether or not the size of the reserve is sufficient for a university of our size. If the composition of the well, I know you know the composition of the reserve, but will you be working with units holding reserves to determine their uses?
Yeah, so thank you for this question. It's a big question, and it's one that we actually need to mark as a result of the end of fiscal 24. So I'm not deflecting it. We are in reserves that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I would argue if we looked at our reserves that aren't committed for other funds or for other needs, that we're probably in the $400 to $500 million range. And that is a result of intentional, if you will, saving that we did while we were getting support from the federal government to anticipate for this day. I will be happy to provide that breakdown that you asked for. In fact, this is something that we will do as we close the 24 books. If I gave you the figures for fiscal 23, they wouldn't be useful because things have changed a lot. So we will be getting that as we close fiscal 24, and we will make that available. And in fact, we'll put that on the agenda for the next town hall to talk about. Yes, we'd be working with units because a lot of these reserves are owned by units. So as to really understand the needs for those. A great deal of the reserves are chancellor-based. Many are school-based. A limited number are university-wide based, and we have to look at all those pieces there. Are they sufficient for a university of our size? No, they're not. They are sufficient for us to do this process, if you will, but they're nowhere near where our counterpart universities are. We have been historically in a weaker position relative to reserves than other universities of our size and complexity. But I'm not trying to catch up to them. I'm trying to figure out what is right for us, given our circumstances. So we'll specifically put this on the next agenda when we have the fiscal 24 data. And as it is available before that, we'll make it publicly available.
Thank you, Mike. There's some other good questions in here, but I think we should move on, especially because it might be useful to have David also, given that some of them relate to things that he might address in his portion.
Yeah, so we will be getting to these. And some of them, I think will respond, like the one relative to credit rating, we'll put that in the chat because we have that. I will address the voluntary retirement incentive program because that did happen at one time. That is actually governed by state statute. So it is not something that we on our own can decide to do. That is a complexity that we have to deal with, but there is a particular limitation that we have without state action relative to retirement incentive programs. So we'll come back to these, and I would I'd get them at the end here. So next slide. Switching gears now, I want to, as I mentioned, talk about the Concur Travel and Expense program. Now I'm going to invite Maggie Quinn, our Associate Vice President for Procurement and Chief Procurement Officer, to kick off the conversation. And we'll go from there. So Maggie, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mike. And good morning, everyone. It's great to have this opportunity to speak to you today. As many of you are aware, Max, you can go to the next slide. Procurement services covers many different areas, including accounts payable, purchasing, which handles the requisitioning to POs, strategic sourcing, and supplier management. These areas handle a great body of work, including over 214,000 purchase orders and 250,000 invoices processed annually. However, our travel and expense team, which is also part of UPS, is a small but mighty group within us, and it handles a significant amount of work. Next slide, please. So here are some numbers from that team. You can see that air tickets alone, over 17,000 were issued last fiscal year, and $9.6 million of value for those tickets. We had rail tickets valued at $350,000 and car rentals over $200,000. Next slide. The card programs also fall under travel expense. And you can see by the numbers on this slide, that unit handles a great deal of transactions. We had over $11 million on our P-card spend, $20 million on the travel spend cards, and $320,000 on the fuel spend. Next slide. And the final piece that falls under travel and expense is the expense reimbursements. So last year, travel and expense processed over 20,000 expense reports, reimbursing employees up to $10.5 million. As part of that process, they also audit reports to make sure that we're in full university compliance, and over 4,000 audits were conducted. Next slide, please. So the Concur Travel and Expense tool unifies both online booking with expense management. So as most of you know, back in 2022, we adopted the online booking tool that enabled online booking, 24/7 customer service. It provided much greater insights for the units. It ensured the traveler care. And it also integrates with our loyalty programs, so travelers can also benefit from that. And as Mike alluded to, on July 1st, we went live with the expense side of that tool. So we are now a full Concur Travel and Expense school. The expense tool helps to integrate access to pre-travel steps, travel booking, and expense reporting. So it simplifies the expense reimbursement process because you can incorporate your expenses that were placed on P cards right within the tool. It streamlines the management of university cards and including the elimination of the need for journal entries, which is a huge advantage to this tool. And it also has mobile-friendly systems for on-the-go management. Next slide. So next, I'm happy to introduce our travel operations manager, Lauren Ruiz. We were fortunate enough to have Lauren join our operations in January of this year. Lauren brings with her over 14 years of travel experience, and she has been a great participant and leader in this implementation process for Concur Expense. Lauren's going to walk you through some more of the highlights of the expense tool.
Thank you, Maggie. Next slide. Okay, so over the last 2 years, we have been implementing Concur, and getting opinions and feedback was the most important to us. So we involved many different people and many different departments, procurement services, project management team, and implementation partners. We had an advisory council, and we involved university stakeholders. Next slide. Okay, so some of the key travel features, the first one being pre-trip approval. That is going to be the newest and most different for people to get used to. All business travel now requires a pre-trip approval, which is known as request in Concur. So you cannot travel until you have that request submitted and approved by your approver. Once you create that request, you put in all of your travel information, and when you get back from your trip, you can then convert it into a report. So it's a very seamless process. The next two features are my favorite. The first being personal car mileage. So personal car mileage, you used to have to go and put in all the information yourself, Google Maps, all of that. Now Concur does it for you. So it automatically calculates the appropriate reimbursement rate. You just put in the addresses and Google Maps is already integrated and it does it for you. The next one is a really, really awesome feature, the per diem calculation. That was always a big pain point for people, having to figure out the per diem rate for different cities. And then the first and last day of your travel is always at 75% of the per diem rate. And now this does it for you. All you're going to do is put in your travel destination, your dates, and that's pretty much it. It calculates everything for you. So that is an awesome, awesome feature. Next slide. Okay, so this is basically what the start of a request looks like in Concur. So when you first open a request, you'll see your request type and you'll fill in all of your mandatory fields, and then you will create the request. And after that is when you'll add in all of the expenses that you're expected to have on your trip. So a request is only estimates. Once you get back and you submit your report is when you will fine tune it and put in all of your actuals. Next slide. Okay, so this is the personal car mileage calculation. So like you see, in field A, you put in the address you're going, and then you put in where you're starting, and then you're going to put in where you go, and it calculates everything for you. And then at the bottom right-hand side, you'll just add to your expense, and then it's done. Next slide. Okay, so this is what per diem looks like. So in Concur, per diem is called travel allowance. So you will always choose travel allowance if you are trying to get reimbursed for per diem. So by adding a departure and arrival destination, the dates of travel, Concur users can easily estimate their eligible per diem allowance that aligns to location-specific rates and university policy. So like you see on the right-hand side, the first and last day of travel are at 75% of what the per diem rate is. In Orlando, the per diem rate is $64. So all of the boxes in the middle are all boxes you would check off if meals were included in your conference. So once you click those boxes, it will automatically adjust the rate and take that meal out of your per diem reimbursement. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the key card features. So it also makes the whole university card program much more user-friendly. So in Concur, it's a one-stop shop. So you will have your new card requests. So anytime you're applying for a university card, whether it's travel card, P card, you will do it all there. And it goes to your approver, and then you will receive, if your approver approves it, you'll receive an email from Card Services with more instructions. Any changes and adjustments. So if you need to request an increase in your card limit, temporary overrides, and corrections, you will do that there as well. If you need to cancel, close, or reinstate your card, you will also do that in Concur. So everything is done in Concur. And like Maggie said, the best feature would be the no more journal entries, which was a huge pain point for the users. So all of the reconciliation is done by the user. So when you charge something on your card, you will see that charge on your Concur homepage under available expenses. Once you go to available expenses, we recommend doing it monthly. You will create an expense report with those available expenses, and that's how the card's reconciled. So once again, once you get the hang of it, it is super user-friendly and an awesome feature. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have been super busy over the last month doing many trainings, like you can see here. We did 23 live training sessions in just the first 2 weeks of July. We had 9 open office hour sessions, which were 2 hours each, that people just came in and asked their questions. Some people just came in and sat there and listened to other people ask questions. We had 2,711 participants in our trainings. We definitely felt that many questions and many questions answered. So starting next week, to introduce the faculty that was out in July back to Concur, it will be 8 live trainings next week, and we have open office hours plans for the next upcoming months. We had on our website, the procurement services website, you will see many job aids, training videos. It's a great resource, and pretty much all of your questions can be answered there. So I recommend going to the website, and if you have any more questions, you can always come to our open office hours, and our email boxes are always open for your questions. And I think that is it. Next slide. Okay, so yep. So now I will introduce David.
No, we should have time for
Oh,
questions, Lauren.
okay, go ahead.
Back it
Hey,
up one
Erin.
more.
Erin, can I just add one thing?
Please,
I
Maggie,
just
go ahead.
wanted to thank the university community. We've had such great participation in all of our trainings, and they've been such great partners with us. We've gotten great feedback from them, and we've even gotten a lot of positive feedback, which you don't always receive in implementations. And so I just wanted to give a great shout out, thank you to all of you. It's been great collaborating with you on this project.
Thank you. So Maggie and Lauren, I'm gonna throw a couple of questions at you. We have many, so we will, anything we don't get to now, we'll either address at the end in general questions or again in writing. There are a couple of questions in here that relate to the pre-trip approval. So is the pre-trip approval only required when booking air, Amtrak, hotel, and car rental, or in any aspect of travel? And for travel not requiring these bookings, is like booking through the system, is a pre-trip still required? Or does the traveler only have to submit an expense report? So the question is, do we need pre-trip for everything regardless of whether it's going through the system or a specific type?
So you need a pre-trip approval, which is a travel request for any type of travel that you're seeking reimbursement for. When you're in a travel status and you're seeking reimbursement, you will always need a request. If you do not have that request, you will not be able to seek reimbursement through an expense report. So a request is required.
Okay, and one, while regarding pre-travel, they could choose their airline and schedule, or does that happen? That's a separate process. Are you accounting for a specific airline during your pre-trip?
Okay, so the pre-trip, you're going to kind of go and figure out what airline you're going to use, what the amount is. The request is to give your business office an idea of what the trip will cost. So it's not going to be exact because, like everyone knows, flights change dramatically in a short periods of time sometimes. But if the flight's $500, you are going to put it on there, United $500 flight. That's what you're expecting it to be.
Thank you. I'm trying to see if I can summarize very quickly so we can get a few more of these in person. How about, well, so a couple of them are relating to there's something related to a 10% variance
Mhm.
in the automatic approval. So given how much has been stated about how much money we have or don't have, what's the logic for the 10% variance automatic approval?
So
Sorry, and then a related question is, when they're auto approved within this 10%, is there any update on how that works, or are journal entries the only option to correct?
Okay, so with the 10% approval, this is for things charged to a GL string only. If you're charging a project, it's always going to go back for approval again. So basically what she's asking is if your request is within 10% of what the actual is on the expense report, it's just going to be approved. If it is anything over that, it's going back to your approver to be looked at again as it's more than 10%. If it's a project, it will always go back to the approver to look at and make sure everything's within the guidelines of the project restrictions.
Okay, thank you.
Erin, just to speak to the logic behind that, which I think the question asked for, often when you're putting in your estimates, you may not have the full information, for instance, on a hotel portfolio with all the additional surcharges and taxes that are included. So the 10% is included to provide an efficiency for the approvers, knowing that those additional charges are usually a small percent and wouldn't hold up the expense report otherwise.
Thank you. So there are also some questions in here that are very specific and related to training. So I think what we'll do is I'll try to sort through them as David presents, and we'll see what we can tackle here, recommend what could be addressed in the training or the open office hours. And then again, anything we don't get to, we'll address in writing. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Erin.
So many thanks to Maggie and to Lauren. Lauren, we're very happy to have you in our team. This is a big project, and hope in the long run everybody will see the importance and the value of this. And next, without further ado, I want to turn it over to David Moore, Vice President for Financial Planning Analytics and our Chief Budget Officer, to talk about the fiscal year 25 budget and to relate some to what I was discussing earlier. So David, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone. Today, I will cover the FY25 budget for the total university. Next slide, please. And next slide. The FY25 budget reflects the values at Rutgers University in fulfilling its core priorities of teaching, research, service, and healthcare. The budget reflects a statement of our priorities and values while taking steps to preserve access and affordability for our students here at Rutgers. Next slide. As we go deep into understanding more about the overall total university budget, the FY25 budget will spend approximately $5.6 billion on the things that are most important to us. As you can see from the pie chart, 77% is spent on our core missions of student instruction, research, public service, and healthcare. Going to the next piece of the overall pie is 15% is spent on operations and maintenance for our facilities and supportive administration. 5% is spent on auxiliary enterprises, which is primarily the housing, dining, and parking operations. And 3% is spent on athletics. Next slide. So now let's explore the categories for a deeper understanding. Our core missions are made up of classroom instructions and academic support, which makes up approximately 1/3 of the total budget. This category includes faculty compensation and staff support for academic units, libraries, as well as dean's offices. This budget item supports and advances Rutgers' high-quality instruction and academic excellence. Student services, scholarships, and financial aid comprises 11% of the budget. The budget preserves the increase in investment in student financial aid and scholarship funding while providing critical services for our students through their time at Rutgers University. Sponsored research and other sponsored programs make up 12% of the budget and includes funds spent on research associated with federal, state, and non-governmental grant and contracts. Public service, extension, and healthcare includes agricultural extension programs, delivery of healthcare, support of health clinics, and community services, which provided throughout the state, which accounts for 21% of the annual budget. Together, These items represent the core mission of student instruction, research, public service, and healthcare. That accounts for approximately 77% of the annual $5.6 billion budget. Next slide, please. Rounding out, the remaining 23% of the annual budget includes administration operation, which supports central administrative offices as well as supports for all of Rutgers facilities, and includes upkeep and utility costs, which accounts for 15% of the budget. Auxiliary enterprises, which includes housing, dining, and the parking operations, account for approximately 5% of the annual expense budget. And athletics, which includes the 24 men's and women's Division I sports programs at Rutgers, New Brunswick, accounts for approximately 3% of the annual budget. It's important to note that nearly 3/4 of the athletic budget is supported through self-generated revenues that athletic programs generates. Next slide. So to kind of talk about the overall expenses, as the university was developing its overall financial plan for FY25, a few of the items that put upward pressure on the costs included salary increases, as well as rising costs in healthcare premiums and pension contributions. In addition, there has been inflation increases in supplies, travel, and just overall general operating expenses. These are not uncommon. We've seen these even in our own personal budgets, if you will, that there has been rising costs in just everyday operating costs. Next slide. So let's look at the revenues and where the funds come from. Approximately 27% of our projected annual revenues come from tuition and fees. We go to our next category, State of New Jersey, state appropriations. Coming to Rutgers represents about approximately 21% of the university revenues. Approximately half of those revenues in the state appropriation come to the university as unrestricted operating support, which is the funds that we can use to support the university operations. The other portion is received to cover costs of fringe benefits for some of our employees. Next category is the healthcare and affiliate, which represents revenues from governmental payers, private insurers, and affiliated agreements for patient care services, which accounts for approximately 20% of the overall annual revenue budget. Skipping over one category, moving over to sponsor research. This funding includes grants and contracts from federal, state, and non-governmental entities, which makes up approximately 15% of our overall annual budget. And rounding out the revenue budget is miscellaneous sources, which includes student, federal, and state financial aid, auxiliary enterprise funding, as well as athletics, endowment, and investment income, which accounts for approximately 17% of our annual revenue. Revenue drivers anticipated in the FY25 budget shows an increase in tuition fees. With the implementation of the Common Application, which has helped in increasing the total numbers of applicants, we do anticipate an increase in overall enrollment. Turning to state support, Rutgers saw increases in outcomes-based allocation and the value of the state-paid fringe allocation, which covers the state-paid fringe benefits, which offsets some of the rising costs and fringe benefits. In addition, there is growth in sponsor activities related to the growth in overall submissions, awards, and corresponding grants and contract revenues from federal, state, and non-governmental entities. Moving to the miscellaneous sources under auxiliary enterprises, there's continued efforts to increase occupancies and housing across Rutgers and participation in dining plans, and it is anticipated that both these operations will see additional revenues in FY 2025. Next slide. I will now turn to tuition fees and financial aid that were built into the overall total university budget. Next slide. The FY25 budget includes a 4% increase in tuition and a 4% increase in mandatory fees for most undergraduate and graduate programs. For a typical undergraduate arts and science student who is a New Jersey resident, that will equate to, on average, $274 for tuition and $63 for mandatory student fees per semester. So that is the increase. For students choosing to live on campus, room and board fees will increase based on the type of room and meal plan that the student selects. Next slide. We put a high priority on keeping Rutgers affordable by providing our students with institutional student aid, qualifying state and federal aid, and grant programs. Next slide. There are many ways that Rutgers students and their families are able to reduce out-of-pocket costs. It's important to note that when we look at last year's data, 75% of our undergraduate students received some form of financial aid. As we look at what Rutgers is doing to preserve and improve access and affordability, we can look at the institutional financial aid that is offered. Next slide. There is the Bridging the Gap program at Rutgers Camden, Run to the Top program at Rutgers Newark, and the Scarlet Guarantee program at Rutgers New Brunswick. These programs are complemented by the state of New Jersey's Garden State Guarantee program. They were designed to make college more accessible and affordable by offering the last dollar financial aid for New Jersey students. Each program has 3 funding tiers that uses adjusted gross income, or AGI, up to a certain level. Federal and state financial aid programs are another option to reduce out-of-pocket costs. These critical financial aid programs from the federal and state financial aid programs, coupled with those that are provided at Rutgers, is all provided to help our students. Next slide. Through this budget for FY 2025, Rutgers strives to provide an affordable, high-quality education for students and achieve academic and research excellence. And going back to the presentation that Mike shared, financial sustainability is a strategic imperative and the best path forward. I'll pause here for any questions that the audience has.
Aaron, you're muted.
Thank you, David. I think we're looking to see if we have some general questions.
Okay.
For you, and then I think we'll have some in the general Q&A. So, Aaron?
Yeah, Mike, thanks for jumping in. I was talking to you all on mute. David, one question's come in. Have the FAFSA issues, this might be for you or for Mike together, have the FAFSA issues with the federal government been fixed, and how has this impacted the university budget?
I'll take that, David.
Okay.
Have the FAFSA issues with the federal government been fixed? Sort of. And what I mean by that is that we have been able to use the FAFSA information to package financial aid for our incoming and continuing students. But it has not been without a great deal of effort. The Department of Education is focusing very hard on, as they've told us, on the next round of FAFSA and financial aid for a year from now, for classes entering a year from now and continuing, which has also meant that certain things that they have done in the past to make financial aid or FAFSA corrections easier to manage have been stopped or been withheld, which has caused us to do a lot of manual effort, manual work in that regard. That said, we're doing whatever we need to do to get the students where they need to be. So I don't think it has necessarily been fixed, but it is better than it was. It took until the beginning of May, first week of May, to get appropriate information from the Department of Education and from the state higher education financial aid agency before we could package appropriately, and over the course of a weekend did 38,000 packages, which was a heroic effort, but it was one that we should have been doing those in January and February and March, as we were doing appropriate admissions. So has it affected our budget? I think that we are in a position that are between demand for Rutgers education, if you will, and the introduction of the Common App, that we're going to be in a good place for enrollment. That's based on, all the understandings up until today. Enrollment at Rutgers is a little volatile around the beginning of school. You actually have to go through a few weeks to see, withdrawals and adds and adjustments and so on that students do before we know exactly where we are. But the trends look good in that respect, and that's due to a lot of hard work by our enrollment management teams to compensate for what has been a very difficult process of FAFSA. And I am cautiously optimistic that the next round will be better. But I am also realizing that that a year ago it was said that they would be in a better position than they ended up in. So again, a lot of thanks to our enrollment management teams, to our OIT, to our project management office, to our project executive, John Fahey, who has been fighting fires as we've gone along on this thing. So to get us where we are today, but we've got to get to a better place. We've got to get to a place where we can share more information with prospective students a lot sooner. But the federal government has to help us be able to do that.
Thank you. Another question is, can you speak to the state prioritizing higher education, how that contributes? And relatedly, speak to the fringe rates, what negotiations or activity is ongoing with the state to lower those fringe rates?
David, you do the first, I'll do the second.
Okay. In terms of the state appropriation and how it higher education in the state, it was, and we thank the state for their support. There was an increase, of course, provided through outcomes-based funding, as I shared, and that was very helpful to offset some of the rising costs from salaries and also the value of the state paid fringe for some of our employees was also increased based off the increase of the overall fringe rate, which is the second part of the question, but it was very helpful to see that increase from the state toward the end for our outcomes-based funding, which helps offset some of the costs of negotiated salary increases.
And speaking of the fringe rate, that is a very difficult topic and has been one that the presidents, our government relations staff, anybody who is talking to anybody in the state is trying to address. We have a very good benefits package at the university. It comes through the state. Our state health plan, our health plan is the state employees health plan. Costs for that plan have been going up astronomically. That is in terms of utilization, that is in terms of cost of providing care. And we are in a pool with the entire state population, state employee population. So it isn't specific to Rutgers that those costs have been going up and been passed along in the form of the fringe benefit rate. We also continue to get the brunt of impact from years of unfunding, lack of funding by the state government for the pension plan. The pension plan is a defined benefit plan. Most would refer to it as PERS. There's some others that are specific to certain employee types, but hers was not funded for many years. This governor has tried to fill that gap in terms of having sufficient funds in the pool so as to ensure being able to provide benefits on an actuarial basis down the road. But that comes at a cost as well, and has been a significant pressure on our fringe rate, along with all the other institutions in the state. So what could be done to address that? There are a number of different conversations with the, providing more direct fringe support. We currently have a significant amount of fringe support that goes to, you will support the fringe benefit costs for federal and for federal grants and contracts. We could benefit from more money for other types of funding sources, including our own. We do have over 11,000 positions in the university for which we do not pay fringe benefits. And you see the value of that on your budgets if you have a line in revenue called state paid fringe. That's the imputed value of that and offsets the cost. But we still have 7,000 positions on average for which we have to reimburse the state at that fringe benefit rate, which is why it's high. That's what we're getting charged and what we have to pay back to the state. And I think it's going to require continued pushing by our government relations people, by our president, by anyone else, again, who is talking to state officials to say what this is doing to the university. We're talking about an increase year over year of tens of millions of dollars. And higher up on that number, in terms of 8 digits. And it is not sustainable over time for us to have to absorb those. But and if the state wants to have high quality higher education, both through Rutgers and the other state colleges and universities, I think they're going to need to address this. But it is a tough issue with when you come to all the demands that are placed on the state budget year over year. So there's no easy answer, and as much as anything is continue to say, to make it clear, this is not sustainable, here's the impact, here's what it's costing. And I don't mean in just dollars, I mean what it's costing in terms of pressure on programs, pressure on, our financial sustainability is tough enough without having to deal with that, but that adds to it as an additional challenge, as we have to pay for those, directly pay for those 7,000 positions.
Thank you. We have plenty of other questions, as well as some questions left over from the procurement presentation. Do you want to move to a bit of general Q&A, Mike?
Yeah, let's just move to that. And but I do want to get back to the questions on Concur as well. Just for everybody's benefit, again, reminder, we're going to take each of the questions that come in. If we do not get to it, we are going to put together an answer, and we're going to put it on the website with the other materials for here. May take a few days for us to do that, but they will be there, and we will let everybody know where to find that.
Okay, so if we could bring Lauren and Maggie back on, I'll give David and Mike a break, ask a couple of those questions, and then return. And I believe we have a next slide, Max. So Maggie and Lauren, like I said, a lot of questions, good questions in here. Some of them relate to the feature on mileage reimbursement. So can you provide just a little bit more detail on how that works? Is the starting point always the university or your home? Do you have information you can share about how the system accounts for flexibility around detours? What about travel between campuses? There's a lot here, so if you can kind of provide some insight for the group, that'd be helpful.
So with the mileage reimbursement, you do have the option to adjust it for traffic reasons if your navigation took you a different route. So you can make those adjustments there. And it also has a deduction for your commute from your home to your workplace. So some people ask about that a lot, and it does offer you that deduction as well, for when you're traveling to different campuses and you want to start at your home campus. I think that was the question.
Yes, thank you.
When you're traveling to an airport. So if you're traveling to Newark Airport, your distance that you would normally travel on that work day to your work office would be deducted.
Thank you. There's a question related to the purchasing card aspect of this. The old card program required you to sign off in BOA Works. Is that still the case?
No.
For charges not related to travel?
No, everything charged on the card will show up in your available expenses and must be added to an expense report. Whether it's water, whether it's office supplies, whatever it is, it will show up in Concur and has to be added to an expense report. That is how it's reconciled. So same card program.
But it's important to note, so any charges related to a travel request should be brought into the expense report related to that trip. Other P card purchases that are made throughout the month, we would only want you to submit one monthly expense report to reconcile those ordinary P card charges that you might have for your department that month. We're encouraging you not to do independent reports for each and every purchase you make, just once per month.
And those would go on a non-travel report.
Correct.
If I may, Lauren and Maggie, for just a second, but the point about deducting the distance from home to office, that's an IRS regulation. That's not something that we made up. That is something that in order for the reimbursement to be tax-free, we have to deduct that amount. So I just want to make it clear that's not some policy we have that is trying to nickel and dime you. That is IRS regulation.
Thank you.
Very good point.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all for so many great questions. Maggie, this one's for you. If you are able to provide some insight into the numbers we shared related to reimbursement, travel expense related reimbursements, since many staff conferences and seminars are now recorded or available via Zoom. What work is going on to limit expenses? Why are there so many expenses that still require audits? I'm losing the question, but I'll get back to you on the audit question if you could begin by giving us some insight into how you see the travel expense reimbursement and what guidelines exist to limit or address those expenses.
Absolutely. And I know that's a challenge, as we continue to face our struggles with financial sustainability. It's something that should be on the forefront of each department's minds, how best to spend their limited budget. We are an institution that's educational in nature, and we do believe in furthering and advancing our employees in their respective fields. And, we do send them to conferences. As far as guidance, we have rolled out a discretionary spend program which we have met with all the campuses and all of the business leaders to discuss ways in which they can best manage their, what we call discretionary spend. And yes, travel would fall within that area of discretionary spend. Erin, I would urge inclusion of our webpage from the procurement website in response to this question, so that whoever asked it can fully review all the resources available to them to help guide them in that effort.
Thanks, Maggie. Let's go, this one's for Lauren, a little bit of background on the implementation process. On your slide, we shared that university stakeholders and members of the community were involved. Can you provide a bit more insight into who those people were? Are they people that actually use the system now?
Yes, it is people who were going to be using the system.
Okay.
Erin, if I can elaborate, this
yeah.
this has been a PMO project and a cornerstone project. So there was participation across all campuses, all areas of the university, and inclusion of both people who submit the reports, as well as approvers who approve the reports, as well as the people who they report to, who help make decisions on which solution to pick and what options within the implementation process to select.
Thank you, Maggie.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, there are a couple of questions in here related to the process for like the actual process for reimbursement and the time it currently takes. Can you talk a little bit about that and whether or not, I'll add to this person's question, do we anticipate that the system is changing it? So again, why does travelers reimbursement take so long? And since we today are talking about a new system, will it change?
So we've seen a drastic increase in reports coming in. Thanks to Maggie, we've added 2 more auditors. So we are working tirelessly to get them out as quick as possible. Once we're hoping eventually it will be much faster like it used to be, but there are a lot of reports currently in audit, and we are working as fast as possible to get those out.
And Erin, in part, we had asked everyone to complete any current reports in the system, that they would have to go full cycle prior to implementation of Concur. So we anticipate that a lot of reports were held because they weren't sure that they could be completed within that time. So there was a very large influx of reports initially when the system went live. So we're doing our best. If anyone is waiting an extraordinary period of time, please just email the expense report email address. Maybe we can include that in the answer, and we can try to check on your individual reports.
Okay,
It's just temporary, though.
I will definitely add that. For those who are following along, in the same place where you can add a question and answer, you can see any that we've answered on a separate tab, and some of them I'm typing. But we will also, again, share this information. Mike and David, welcome back. A couple of additional questions for this group. We're going to begin with one way in the beginning for Mike. You, in your presentation, talked a little bit about our new financial strategy policy. It indicates a 5% net margin, which seems to demonstrate more of a for-profit environment. Looking at you first, Mike, and perhaps also David, how can we look to the RCM model we use at Rutgers to address some greater institutional needs?
Thank you for that question, and I couldn't have asked for a better setup, so I really appreciate that. Let me talk about the net margin, because I want to put it in perspective. So we're not a for-profit organization, but on the other hand, if we don't generate additional funds, then we don't have anything to work with. And what I mean by that is we have a tremendous need to address deferred maintenance, the university. And that is both, as I mentioned, facility and technology. We have technology demands that are constant. We have need to replace buildings or to rethink, our physical plant. We need money for innovation. So the 5% is not to drop it to the bottom line and go to shareholders or something like that, nor is it to go into reserves. It's to be used for the capital that we currently cannot do. We don't have spare funds to work on deferred maintenance. We don't have spare funds for new technologies. We have to scrimp and borrow and pull from other places, and what we need to do is be in a position where we can regularly generate enough of those funds that are free that we can make a difference in terms of these needs. So it is not just to make a profit. It is not just to run a bottom line. It is so to reinvest back into the university, in particular those areas that are struggling from a deferred maintenance point of view. And it reminds me of a comment that a college president said at a conference. Nonprofit. His statement was, "Nonprofit is a tax status, not a financial strategy." If you run at a constant deficit or constant break even from an operating perspective, you don't have funds to reinvest. You don't have capacity to be able to take on, for instance, more debt and be able to pay the debt service for that. And that's why that is so important, that we get to a point where we are not a negative bottom line. Even a zero bottom line isn't good enough, because we need to have some funds available so as to address these tremendous needs that we have. And we want to have a conversation about deferred maintenance. We could put that on a future town hall, because IP&O and OIT have very good information in terms of what our deferred issues are. David, you want to address the other part of that question?
So in terms of addressing from the RCM standpoint, that is part of kind of the financial sustainability too, is really looking at our overall expenses as well. So again, as Mike said, that dropping the 5% margin is really about providing resources so that we can do things to address not only deferred maintenance, but I'm going to pick up on innovation that Mike mentioned, and that is really so we have funds to invest back into academic programs, so that we can then look at really the most popular programs and think about multidisciplinary and so forth, so that we can really have continue to track our brightest students and have programs that they are interested in. These are funds that sometimes we don't have available for that innovation, and we do need to have that innovation funding available as well as addressing our deferred maintenance.
Thanks, David.
I'm mindful of time, but another question, Mike, that perhaps you can address at least briefly with a quick start is, some economists are projecting a recession in the coming months, similar to 07-08. Is Rutgers in a position to weather that storm if that happens, given the decrease in reserves? And how do you anticipate that would impact faculty and staff?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good crystal ball, be able to tell that. And in fact, I've paid very close attention recently to a number of different economists, and there is a variety of opinions about where are we heading in the economy. And I'd like to say that we were well positioned to handle a recession coming forward. We are taking those steps through this financial sustainability project to get ourselves in a position of better resilience. The other point of having the bottom line is to have resilience when things have a temporary downturn and be able to move forward. So I cannot say that we're in a position to weather that storm precisely as we are without making changes to programs or staffing. I can't say that. That would be disingenuous. That said, I also look at economists who say that we are going to be moving forward in a reasonably stable position. I don't know who's right. You know, when you have dueling economists, you've got to just be vigilant and to pay attention to things such as student demand, to things such as inflation, to things such as what is happening to incomes in the general economy, a number of factors. And you know, I'd love to have a great crystal ball to be able to say, this is what's going to happen. Here's what we're going to do to prepare for it. I think the steps to become more efficient, to be operationally excellent, to focus on program and increasing program demand. I think those are the steps that we need to take that will help for that resilience as well. But you know, I can't pretend to promise that those are things that immediately we can do.
Thanks, Mike. We have time, I think, for one more question. I will say that a lot of the questions in here are bubbling around, particularly their travel in between campuses. So we'll make sure that we get some clarity and clearly right answers to that for the group. We'll also share information about the upcoming trainings and office hours. But since we have a question that's totally different than all the others, I'll see if you're up for answering it, Mike. We are coming up on the start of the college football season, and Rutgers has its first game, the Scarlet Knights, next week. One person asks about NIL, the name, image, likeness. It says that NIL may add to athletics funding requirements that could be significant in the future, that may require additional subsidized funding from the university. Are there thoughts or plans right now on how NIL is going to be funded without putting athletics into greater deficit?
Thank you for that question, I think. And I say I think because the position around NIL and compensating student athletes has been volatile in the last year. I just had a briefing yesterday from the CFO of the Big Ten with where the conference thinks things are going to land relative to a variety of class action lawsuits that have been out there against the various conferences and the NCAA regarding compensation for name, image, likeness for student athletes. We've got across the country right now, amongst 50 states, 50 different structures, legal structures around NIL. And that's because each state has been allowed to write their own rules to a certain degree, and that the US Congress has not come in and settled one set of rules. But that's something that is possible. That's something that could happen after the election, where we get some standing rules, along with some certainty in terms of settlement of lawsuits and general rules around NIL, how it's supposed to work, so that we're on the same playing field as literally and figuratively as the other institutions in Division I athletics. So how are we trying to address those costs? There's a great deal of conversation at the conference level in terms of the value of TV contracts, but also a lot of work in terms of attracting sponsors and other sources of revenue that would help to compensate for these additional costs, or other additional costs that come into Division I athletics. We are paying a whole lot of attention to things such as schedules and coordinating travel for teams and looking at a lot of the underlying operating costs associated with managing D1 athletics in New Brunswick. I wish there were an easy answer. I've been looking for one for a couple of years now. There isn't one. So what we have to do is to pay attention to what is going on in the courts, what is going on with the NCAA, what's going on with our conference, and try to position athletics to be in a better position to self-fund more of their activities. One of the most important things in terms of funding student athletes is people buying football tickets. And if we have a good team on the field and start to fill SHI Stadium more, that helps. That helps a lot. And that's something that has been more challenging in recent years. And that is well understood by Coach Giano. And they're doing a lot of work to try to be more competitive on the field and therefore get people to buy tickets to help offset that. And that sounds simplistic, but it really is a factor. It really, really is a factor. So, come to the football games. And this is also an area that, stay tuned, hold that question for me for future discussions, because I learn something new every week in terms of where things are going relative to funding D1 athletics. But it has been somewhere between the wild, wild west and chaos in the last couple of years because of things such as, different NIL rules and competition and collectives and so on. That was a long answer to something that I'll leave it at that a moment. And we are at time. I want to thank everybody for attending. We will post answers to the questions, as Aaron suggested. We're going to consolidate some of them. Let's bring up the last slide for Ask the Experts. I want to thank the speakers today, David Moore, Maggie Quinn, Lauren Ruiz. I want to thank Aaron for hosting us. Thank all of you for attending and throwing good questions at us. We will answer them all, and we will get those out to you, along with recording of this and the deck that we used here. So anything else we need to cover, Aaron? Or
Yes, so in addition to answering all of your questions, we also hope that you will provide us with your feedback. So I'll be dropping I have been talking once again on mute, but in addition to answering your questions, we would love to hear your feedback. So you will now see a survey in the chat. We'll also send this out to you in email. Please do take the time to complete it. We do value your feedback and are always looking to improve. Thank you. And we'll see you in Ask the Experts.